Have you ever thought about why some of the most creative minds in history had a hard time in traditional research on classrooms shows a surprising pattern. Students who do well with rules, following and compliance were often hard to come up with new ideas later in life. In 2014, the University of Pennsylvania study found that people who didn't fit in were 27% more likely to start their own businesses than the students who follow the rules are getting the most praise, or the least likely to happen statistically, change industries, or make new and innovative solutions. This brings up a deep question that Machiavelli would immediately take advantage of if our education, the system really wanted to make people independent. People who think and will lead wouldn't. This result should be seen as disastrous, or maybe it's working just like made so that everyone can see what you look like, to have few experiences that are real, are these words from Niccolo Machiavelli. Masterpiece, the prince gets the heart of what we'll talk about today, the secret goal of modern education, systems, and how they change us in certain ways, that Machiavelli himself would know as tools of society. Control. Machiavelli knew that the best ways to control don't look like control at all when he wrote that the vulgar crowd always gets what they want. Looks, and the world is made up of mostly of the vulgar. The genius of you won't find modern education in its clear limits, but in how it changes how people think while looking like. Think about how great the expansion is. System follows his rule that it's better to be feared than loved, though when fear is hidden as care, it works best. Our school system doesn't put people down through clear force, but also through subtle mechanisms that affect how students see themselves and what they can do. I want to be clear before we go on. It's clear that this isn't an attack on teachers. Most teachers start out with really passionate and care a lot about their students' growth, which is what we're looking at. The system itself, it's the history of structural design. And Machiavelli would have unspoken goals that immediately see as tools of keeping the power in modern education. System wasn't mostly made by teachers or experts in child development. Its basic structure was mostly made by business people in the needed in the 19th and early 20th centuries. A workforce with certain factory owners didn't have these traits, needed people who could think for themselves and be trusted. People who would show up on time, follow orders without question, and accept authority in a hierarchy. Charles Eliot, president of Harvard University, made this purpose clear in 1905. We want one group of people we want a liberal education, and another group of people, a lot more people, need to give up the right to a liberal education and fit to do certain hard things for themselves. This two-tiered approach makes manual tasks easier. Is a perfect example of Machiavelli's understanding of power in The Prince. He tells rulers to keep things separate, groups of people who rule and those who serve. The school system makes this happen, separation, while keeping the illusion of meritocracy. Finland has shown other ways to do things. Could consistently rank among the best schools in the world while putting a lot of emphasis on student freedom, standardized tests, and play-based tests learning. But as Machiavelli would say, what works for power isn't always what serves people. Men are so simple and so likely to do what to follow the needs of a liar right away. Will always have victims for his rote lies. Machiavelli education is a great example of how to use this insight through random rules that don't have anything to do with learning. Think about rules against chewing, strict dress codes for walking on gum. These rules apply to certain sides of hallways. Mostly normalize following random orders without question. Studies show that kids follow rules when they don't get it, when they confuse authority with, for example, psychologists found morality, that teens often listen to adults, even when rules don't make sense. Justification that Machiavelli would agree with, this as masterful conditioning. He told princes that their subjects had to be kept happy and satisfied not by freedom, but only through the illusion of training kids to have order and purpose, to obey rules without knowing why. The goal of education is to make adults mentally trained to follow orders, with rules even when those rules might work against their own interests are different from this. Shugata's hole in the wall. Experiments in India that showed that kids need very little help could learn how to use a computer on their own skills through curiosity-driven searching. When allowed to learn on their own, kids did amazing things: self-organization and thinking critically, exactly the traits Machiavelli would tell leaders to keep people down. They want to be in charge of this discipline. Frameworks work together without any problems: strong dependency on a mechanism, external validation from gold stars, to teachers' grade point averages, approval for standardized test scores. Students learn how to measure their worth through how others see you as. Machiavelli said that men judge more often than women. By the eye more than by the hand, because people can see you, but not many people can. To get in touch with, you make adults by validating them from the outside, who don't really believe in their own judgment, always looking for approval from people in charge. When you get most of your sense of value, you become easier from outside of yourself to change by simply saying yes. Mechanisms: adults raised on outside validation often put praise ahead of. A study from 2020 linked academic purpose to perfectionism that leads to anxiety at work, and risk aversion. The need for outside help validation that started in school right away had an effect on their financial choices as adults and bargaining power. The exact result: Machiavelli would plan to make, following the rules, citizens Montessori education, which focuses on learning on your own and intrinsic motivation, is a powerful. This validation trap is the opposite of, has made too many of creative innovators who started Google, Sergey Brin and Larry Page, Jeff from Amazon, Bezos, and Jimmy Wales, who started Wikipedia. All of them went to Montessori schools. This different way of doing things grows exactly what Machiavelli would warn against: rulers against making their own decisions, and validation from within that goes beyond discipline. And validating traditional education uses a third way to control knowing: breaking up learning into parts by teaching subjects in isolation makes it hard to see how things are related and understand systems as a whole. This compartmentalization is basically when knowledge is Machiavellian. When it is taken out of its context, it becomes harder to see patterns of power or come up with complete answers to complicated problems. That a prince should not have any other war, and its rules are the only thing on their mind. And discipline, wrote Machiavelli. The breaking up of knowledge is a way to disarm the mind, keeping people from knowing systems of power that are linked to each other, at the same time with curved grading, rankings in class and competition. Admissions education teaches that success is hard to come by and must come at others' expense. This makes the exact. Machiavelli said that rulers should have a certain mindset: encourage their subjects to compete, stops the formation of a unified against him. When he wrote, "A prince should," so there is trouble between the people of conquered cities. This breaking up makes a fear of failure stronger. That men should further limit potential, be treated well or destroyed, Machiavelli said, because they get back at people for small injuries. They can't do it for heavy ones. School puts this idea into practice through its punishing mistakes and wrong answers. Keep in mind how heavy it is to get an F, the shame of giving the wrong answer, the possibility. Teasing that could come after a dumb question. Education in a systematic way gives more punishment for mistakes than rewards. This makes people want to explore, afraid of being wrong and avoiding risks, and stay on safe, tried and true paths, even when innovation might be better for them. This risk in a world that changes quickly. Fear is paralyzing for people, but it helps the current power structures. People who are perfectly risk-averse are rare. Disrupt systems or make them harder to use. This disconnect explains other options. Why a lot of people who think differently had trouble in traditional schools. Places where Richard Branson dropped out of. Steve Jobs dropped out of school at 16. Reed College, but only for calligraphy classes, later giving them credit for Apple's his lesson on revolutionary typography. You can't see how everything fits together. Looking ahead, just backward, these innovators found ways to get away from the three limits of random discipline, outside validation, and broken up knowledge, just the ways that Machiavelli would understand as ways to control. While a lot of traditional education may limit some parts of development, Machiavelli himself would agree that those who need proper education are want to lead. He stresses how well the prince does it, how important it is to study. Wise men say that history is not without reason, that anyone who wants to see the future needs to look to the past, for human events have ever been like those of before times. Some ways of teaching really grow as a leader's skills that Machiavelli would admire. He really believed in learning from historical examples, as he wrote, a wise person should always follow in the footsteps of great men and do what they do. Those who have the best education that looks at real-life examples from the past, political strategy and knowledge, power dynamics, can create leaders who have a deep understanding of human nature, and social makes the best leaders have to. Students of history have often been able to use what you've learned in the past to deal with problems now. Winston Churchill had a lot of historical knowledge, guided his strategic decisions made during World War I. Angela Merkel and others are similar, have used their knowledge of history to deal with difficult problems in today's world. Military and some kinds of leadership programs make things hard on purpose, exactly because they understand what Machiavelli knew about being a leader. Capabilities are made through facing and getting past problems, not through comfort. These ways of teaching don't protect students from problems, but show them how to get around it successfully. While people often get Machiavelli wrong as pushing for pure ruthlessness, a close look at his work shows that he, knowing what it means to be a good leader, needs a deep understanding of people's psychology. As he wrote, men are driven by two main impulses, love or by fear. Education that makes people grow. Emotional intelligence is the skill to read other people well and handle relationships that work well. Create leaders who know how to deal with people. The main difference is that it worked. If education limits possible or to fully develop it, whether it makes people follow it, or the lion can't protect himself from leaders, from traps, and the fox can't to protect himself from wolves. One must be a lion to see traps and a fox to see them, to scare wolves. Wrote, Machiavelli used this metaphor perfectly. Shows how important it is to make your own validation systems that don't depend on approval from outside. What part of your schooling conditioning has been the hardest for? Ask, overcome. What would I think about this if it were me? If no one else agreed, it was important to practice trusting your gut, especially when it goes against. This is what people usually think or say. Machiavelli says that an internal compass is thought to be necessary for any useful leader. Maria used to get straight A's in school. Told her story, I spent years trying to get perfect grades, but stuck in my career. Whenever I had to make choices without clear rules, I had a breakthrough. When I started a side project just for my own happiness without any outside metrics, that the project eventually became my most successful business venture, because I wasn't limited by trying to make happy others. How your life might change if you trusted your own validation more than approval from outside. Naturally, developing internal validation leads to another important skill, interdisciplinary, believing that Machiavelli was the best interdisciplinary thinker who draws on history, psychology, military strategy, and political theory to shape his full worldview. He would tell you to actively look for connections across fields and areas. That traditional, when you learn, education keeps you separate. When you study history, think about the economic forces at play. When you learn about science, look for the ethical implications, a full picture that was broken up. This is often hidden by education. What is a full understanding? Gives you the ability to see systems clearly and work well inside of them. Big alternative education models like picture learning shows this, approach their students in practice, spend a lot of time doing internships, connected to what they like, and then bring real-world observations back to school. The results of the studies speak for themselves. The rates of graduation and success in college. These programs always do better than traditional models that build on thinking across disciplines. Machiavelli would suggest embracing strategic, taking risks. He knew that things would go wrong, are unavoidable in any worthwhile try. As he wrote, all courses of action are risky. Action is risky. So being careful is not in staying away from danger. It's not possible that figuring out risk and doing the innovator's mindset is clear-cut, not ashamed of failures as an endpoints, but as important examples, needed steps toward. Stanford's tool teaches how to be successful, students to write resumes for when they fail, keeping track of failures as badges of honor. Graduates who use this method say less anxiety and more willingness to deal with problems this way greatly lowers anxiety and makes people more willing to tackle hard. The wise man does what he does right away. The fool finally wrote. Machiavelli applied to breaking. This means educational conditioning, strategically connecting with other people who are asking the same kinds of questions and putting the same ideas to the test. Awareness and action as a group have the power to change that each person. Efforts rarely work out for the developer alone. Alex Chen talks about what he went through changed everything for me. It wasn't just realizing how my schooling had held me back. I thought it was finding a community of other people finding the same thing. We made learning experiences together. None of us could have done it alone. While personal strategies are very important, Machiavelli himself would know that changing systems takes several ways to change institutions, show that there are no other options, only in theory but already successful in practice. Project-based learning changes the way things are done. Teaching by linking schoolwork to real-world problems, content that relates to real-world problems. High Tech High in San Diego has used this method in all schools, changing regular classes to projects from different fields that deal with real problems. Their documentary, Most Likely to Succeed, shows students learning advanced skills while keeping up their natural curiosity and involvement. This change in teaching style needs teacher training and helping with projects and redesigning the curriculum around the most important things, questions instead of facts that are out of context. But the money spent on education pays off in graduates who show that they are good at both technical skills and creative thinking. Going beyond single examples, Finland's education system approach shows that national systems can put health and well-being first. Deep learning instead of standardized tests and strict compliance from Finnish teachers have a lot of advanced degrees, freedom to work, and fewer more hours of instruction than teachers in most developed countries, giving time for working together on plans and new ideas. Finnish students always do better than those in systems that are more rigid while saying they are happier, and the Finnish model shows that engagement, teacher freedom leads to better results that are better than top-down standardization that suggests reforming education should focus on making teaching more professional instead of standardizing it to go along with these. Evaluation of structural changes. Another important thing is change. Change the way we currently assess things, mainly check for compliance, and remembering instead of being creative, thinking critically or working together. Problem-solving schools in California has been the first state to have a graduation portfolio system that students have to defend their work in front of a panel, showing skills that are important for the real world. Success. This method has brought about huge changes in college rates of persistence among traditionally underserved groups, showing that meaningful assessment can be both strict and policy changes that give people more power backing. Real assessment would include less strict rules about standardized testing, money for making a portfolio systems, and getting into college, standards that value proof skills over standardized metrics. These other options show that education can help people grow instead of limiting them. They show that learning can be fun, be both strict and fun at the same time, structured and creative. Most importantly, they show that Machiavellian you can learn about power and control by not just to limit what people can do, but to set free. Machiavelli would know that true freedom doesn't come from fighting what's already there, not from using other people's systems, but from making your own. The wise prince has always stayed away from relying. He wrote a principle with borrowed arms that fits intellectual perfectly and professional growth. What would your life be like if you built knowledge that comes from being curious instead of curriculum? The most free minds make personal systems that work, not depending on institutions. Self-reliance starts with frameworks, I'm making your own metrics for progress while schools keep track of success. Through grades and certificates, autonomous thinkers keep track of problems. Mastered skills that are useful and meaningful plans. When was the last time you finished? Pursued learning just for its finding your natural intrinsic value. How you learn is just as important as how you take in information when you want to. Some learn by using standardized methods. Some people can see it and others can only do it through trial and error, or teaching other students. Maybe most importantly, being able to rely on yourself means coming up with your own meaning of purpose instead of taking on outside success metrics. What would you go after if you totally ignored the usual status markers that this often shows? Dreams buried under layers of training. This is where things get. It's really interesting that there's a deep. Machiavelli himself would have found it odd that appreciate knowing how systems work. Trying to shape you is a kind of immunity to that shaping, as Machiavelli wrote. A prince should be a fox to see traps and a lion to scare wolves. This gives the impression of something, maybe the most interesting thing. Education isn't just what you learn clearly taught, but the chance to watch and learn about systems of control. Learning about how education, you learn more about yourself when people try to change you into how all systems of power work. This level of awareness is exactly what those who want to keep things the way they are systems would rather you not make. It's why people don't often talk about the goals of education, hardly ever show up in themselves as part of the educational curriculum. Machiavelli knew how to do the best job. Power is what is not looked at. I went through this myself the whole time. I was told at school that I asked too many questions that made me want to know more. The curriculum was a problem. My papers were often given lower grades for coming up with ideas outside the assigned scope. For years, I thought this meant something was wrong with my mind. It wasn't until I came across Machiavelli's writings when I understood those urges to question, to explore beyond boundaries weren't weaknesses were my biggest problems. Strengths, the system's own strengths, were the ones that tried to keep down, would eventually lead to success. And we are at a very interesting point in human history. The crossroads in human history. School system made for the industrial age goes on, even though we've came into a whole new era, one that gives more and more rewards for exactly what traditional education often holds back: independent thinking and creativity, taking risks, and working together. New ideas. It's not a matter of whether parts of what you learned in school were made to limit the evidence you have strongly suggests that some things were the real question. And the one Machiavelli would. What will you do with that is what you should focus on. Awareness. Will you keep looking for grades and different types of approval? Will you keep throughout your adult life doing what you're told without asking why? Their goal will keep you scared of them being wrong and looking dumb, or will you know these are conditioned answers that you can think about? Choose to switch out for different patterns that are most important to Machiavelli. A new way to think about personal power is that in the end, it comes from seeing clearly, seeing past appearances to what is really their realities. As he said, men in general judge more by looking at it instead of touching it, because everyone can see, but only a few can test by feeling like the most important person to anyone. A person who can make a system of positive change is understand how control works and imagine other options. This journey is about more. It's about more than just learning, getting back your mind's natural ability for critical thinking, creativity, and making your own decisions. It's about knowing what makes you is dangerous to systems of control, what makes you valuable to the future of humanity. If this is hit home, if you see these patterns with you in your own education, and if you want to get away from them, share this with someone who needs to hear it. That the biggest act of resistance against systems that are meant to keep people from potential is to bring that potential to life in others. Remember what Machiavelli knew. True power didn't come from centuries ago, from blindly following rules set by others, but from getting better at. It's the one skill you need to think for yourself. They can never take away from you. And the one thing that would make Machiavelli himself nod and agree.